All right, so let us move to third grouping, situational theories. This is part 2, the contingency model. Right? And there's a lot to be said about contingencies. You know, this upsides, downsides, but centers on the concept that the match between style and environment is what's important. So let us determine the environment and then reflect on perhaps what style would be best. Fiedler suggests that leaders are task or relation oriented, and notice this isn't inconsistent with the Ohio State approach, right? So you match the style to the given needs, and you develop the least preferred coworker scale. So from this, high scores indicate relational, while lower scores tend to show people that are task-oriented. So we can actually go into this with a measurement of capabilities. The third component is the position power, that is formal power. And then we get to this relatively complex chart. But the idea is not to necessarily absorb and be able to reiterate this chart, but look at the big picture, right? So we got leader-member relations. Let's start there. What's the relationship between the members, right, and the leaders? So is it good or is it poor? And that's going to dictate. If it's poor but we want it to be good, then we better get someone who's relatively people-oriented, right? But if the relationship is already good between management and the worker, then that becomes less critical at that point. Right? Now the task structure, is it high or low, right? And what do we want it to be? And that can dictate our hiring practice. And then the position power, is the leadership position a strong one or a relatively weak one, right? So here, if we have relatively good relations, either high or low task structure, right? Then we're looking at task motivated leader who's going to have that low that low LPC, right? But so what we're doing is allowing the situation based on these 3 criteria to dictate what the leader might look at, right? So task-motivated leaders are best in octants 1, 2, 3, and 8, right? 1, 2, 3, and 8, whereas relationship-motivated leaders are best in octants 4, 5, 6, and 7. So basically, we just have to assess the nature of our organization and where we want to go, and then from that decide what qualities we should be looking for in a leader, right? And of course, we hope that this has relatively high predictive validity in terms of the selection process. House's revised path goal theory says these are the potential leader behaviors: path goal clarifying, achievement oriented, work facilitation. You can go on down the list, right? But then notice we're still in contingency models. We have to consider, right, the environmental factors. What's the task structure, the nature of the task, and what do we have in the way of work group dynamics? So this is one set of environmental factors that we have to consider, right? Now, here we have employee characteristics, right? And on average, right, what do our employees look like? To what extent are employees able to take care of themselves, that is, have an internal locus of control and call their own shots? What is their need for achievement and their task ability? What's their experience? What's their need for clarity? Notice that these 2 factors then impact what will be useful or less than useful in qualities. And then the leader effectiveness, how can we measure it, right? Is employee motivation, employee satisfaction, employee performance, leader acceptance, to what extent do the employees resonate to the leader, and work unit performance. So what House is saying here is we have to then consider all these factors, but ultimately we begin here with the employee characteristics and the environmental factors. Then we come back here and say, okay, that suggests the nature of these qualities that we should be hiring, and what can we do to demonstrate the effectiveness of our decision making? That is, we can measure these aspects. If we understand this and used it properly here, then we should see good numbers there. All right. So I love theoretical models. I know a lot of people are not necessarily crazy about theoretical models, but from this, right, we can find ways to assess our needs. Let's go back to that idea, right? We assess our needs on the basis of these, then the program is essentially the hiring of the manager, and the evaluation is taking place over here. So when we did the needs assessment, program design, and evaluation, we weren't just whistling into thin air. The idea there was to say, hey, this is applicable, and it's measurement based. Questions? All right, so this is a little on the dry side. Let's do some transformational stuff, right? Let's get excited, right? Transformational versus transactional leadership. Let's start there. Transactional focuses on clarifying employees' role, providing rewards contingent on performance, right? So basically, you know, I got kind of a two-prong approach to leadership. This is the bottom line is transactional. When they hire me, they have expectations. They focus on clarifying what my roles are. You know, it says in my contract, I will be responsible for designing these courses. I will be responsible for this. I will be responsible for that. And if I do my responsibilities, then I will be paid this money. And hopefully, if all is good, then I will be hired again for the following contract period. But let's say the nature of education is transforming, and this is where, let's say, Dr. Cravens-Brown comes in. She says, you know, the old school thing, and Dr. Missy Beers, you know, they say, this old idea of just lecturing and then testing on the lecture materials empirically hasn't been demonstrated to be too effective. And there's other ways, we're studying other ways to educate that are empirically supported in student outcomes, right? And student outcomes becomes a big term that we're using, right? Now, Dr. Beers and Dr. Cravens-Brown then are operating in a transformational leadership setting because they have to take the old way of doing things and transform the way we do business to the future, right? So they pursue organizational goals over self-interest. And let's face it, it's pretty easy for a dyed-in-the-wool lecturer to just write lectures, come in, do lectures, do the midterms, right, that they don't even grade. They just give to a course assistant in the final. And man, that's life on Easy Street, right? And it's familiar, it's comfortable, it's fun, but how do you then convince an old school lecturer to take on the much more burdensome aspect of designing multiple assignments, criteria, work from student outcomes and work backwards, start to reduce the amount of lecturing and increase the amount of activities? How do you convince someone that that's what they should do? You have to transform, right? And that's what transformational leadership, and that's why it's exciting though, right? Because it's complex and it's multifaceted. So transformational leadership then, right? The individual's organizational characteristics. What's the culture? Does it allow for it? Individual traits, are they going to allow for it? Individual life experiences. Transformational leadership has to take all of this into account, right? The leader behaviors, are they inspirational? Do they motivate, right? Do they possess idealized attributes? Now that, we could go back to the traits section in the first part of this lecture, right? Idealized behavior. Oh my God. Now we can go back to the second section and look at idealized behavior. So you get the idea that transformational leadership is pulling from all these different perspectives, if you will. Individual consideration, person-focused, right? Intellectual stimulation. And that's an important component for many, that they're excited about what they do. Now, group and follower impacts, what would we expect to see? We would see increased leader identification. And that is, you might measure that in the number of times that I talk about the leaders in the organization and who I talk about, right? Internal motivation increases achievement orientation. So as I do something and I can start to perform it well, then I might be more inclined to do it in the future. And we can see behavioral outcomes, measurable behavior outcomes. Increased group collaboration. And that is why we participate every Tuesday at 2 in our meeting, right? So Cravens-Brown can use that as a measure. How many people are participating in this conversation, right? And then the outcomes, increased organizational commitment. And that's something that we can measure in several different ways. We have an assignment coming up that will tap into that slightly. Increased commitment to the leader themselves and the vision, but more important to the vision than the leader. And then increased altruism, that is giving of oneself freely and not, boy, if I have to do that, are you going to throw another 50 cents an hour my way necessarily? Which is not a bad question to ask necessarily. So Managerial implications of transformational leadership. Best leaders combine transactional and transformational components. That is, there has to be a certain element of tit for tat. That is, we have to develop a certain amount of work product, right? That is, I teach 4 courses and I get paid $6,600 a course at my current level as a senior lecturer. I know, isn't that disgustingly puny money? Think about it. When it's all said and done, if I teach 8 classes a year, what is that, like $54,000 a year for PhD level? Don't go into a job like this for pay, because you will be disappointed, right? Of course, if I taught in business school, they'd pay me 3 times that. So what is wrong with me? But transformational leadership improves individual outcomes as well as group level outcomes. So group dynamics improve, but so does the intrapersonal aspect of development. Employees at any level can be trained to increase transformational and transactional skills. This is not difficult to do. Part of this course is talking about both of these throughout the whole course, right? Transformational leadership can be either ethical or unethical. There's no guarantee that this is about ethics, right? So that is something, a separate issue, right? So ethical transformational leadership, create and enforce clearly stated code of ethics. And this goes back to the beginning of the course when we started talking about values, right? Recruit, select, promote those that demonstrate ethical behavior. Find some way to measure this and find some way to screen people out who don't. Some people argue that the police hiring system, right? Well, let's look at the police vision. Often police departments say to protect and to serve. Okay? That's a lofty vision, right? And it could even be incorporated as a strong element of mission. Let me offer you this, that the police tend to interact, almost all the people that the police interact with are innocent until proven guilty. The United States Constitution says that we're innocent until proven guilty. So notice that the police interact with people pre-trial, predetermination of guilt. So the assumption is that when a police officer interacts with someone, they should be presumed innocent. But I think, we've seen an awful lot of police that don't operate on that premise. Now, justifications aside, and people can build in all kinds of justifications, my question is, if I'm hiring people who are police officers, do I want to hire people who believe that they have the right to punish the people with whom they interact, who in fact are, by definition, innocent? So we have to be careful about hiring criteria. Are we hiring people who are a good fit, right? Are we promoting, recruiting, selecting people that demonstrate ethical behavior? And beyond that, behavior that's in line with our vision, that's in line with our values. You can't train or teach values. I mean, you can, but I think it's the wrong approach to take. You don't train values, you hire people who already demonstrate the values. Much more successful approach. Develop performance expectations around treatment of employees. And this is part of the appraisal process. A lot of people whine about 360-degree feedback in organizations, but we'll talk about it in a subsequent lecture why it might be important. Identify, reward, praise those that exemplify high moral conduct, right, and make those moral choices. Let us move on then. 2. Emerging models of leadership. Relationship between leader and subordinate is central. No one's style, therefore, applies, right? It's not about the dyadic relationship, which can vary. Relationships are unique, right? So what are we going to look at? We're going to look at exchanges between people where we see reciprocal exchange. That is, that people contribute in both directions. We're looking to foster and observe relationships that demonstrate mutual trust. They should demonstrate genuine respect and liking. And I'll go back to Cravens Brown, I'll go back to Dr. Beers, and these are people, I respect both of them tremendously. I look at the level to which they dedicated themselves to learning, to practicing, to experimenting, and to transmitting their knowledge to others. And it's almost impossible for me not to admire and respect them, and hence breeds the liking, right? And we have a sense of common faith that is within the psychology department as a unit of lecturers, etc. The sense of common faith is that we're all trying to contribute to this greater good, and that is to the benefit of you guys, right? Is where that ultimately plays out. If we've done our job well, then we should see you guys step forward and improve the world. It's really kind of a simple formula. It's not complex, right? So shared leadership, simultaneous ongoing of mutual influence, and we have our Zoom meetings to facilitate that within the lectures, right? We also take shared responsibility, which transcends traditional role or hierarchy. I understand that Cravens Brown is, I guess, my boss. I don't think Dr. Beers, well, I guess Dr. Beers is my boss. Missy is my boss at certain times. If I'm teaching intro social psych, that would be under her purview. But it's hard for me to visualize these people as bosses necessarily, that we don't operate under that strict role or hierarchy. We share information freely. We're all in crisis mode now because Box is going away, Buckeye Box, and will be replaced by something else. But we're very concerned because that's where we share our information, and we hope that it's not kind of made worse. Facilitates teams and the use of teams. Notice in this class, core to it, contributes to creativity and interdependence with each other and sharing of information. Positively associated then with group cohesiveness, that we get tighter with each other, group citizenship, right? And we behave ethically. And group effectiveness, that we get better and better at what we do. So let's talk about level 5 leadership, and this concept is from Collins, is from good to great was his kind of concept there. Multiple skills and capabilities are required. There's not just, we don't come into this with just one skill or characteristic. Level 1-4 demonstrate mastery to employ level 5. And it's an integrative approach combining many elements discussed throughout this lecture, and it's a good place to put it then. Right? So level 1 is a highly capable individual, right? We see that person. But then we institute the use of teams and develop highly contributing team members from these highly capable. Then we identify people with the capacity to manage, right, through this. From the managers, then we should see perhaps a smaller number of leaders, and then the level 5 executive, and builds an enduring greatness, right, through a paradoxical blend, and that's what it is, really, when you get right down to it, of personal humility and professional will. And that's very difficult to achieve, because it's to be humble, to demonstrate this humility, but at the same time have tremendous confidence to move the whole organization along a path. That is, in fact, a tremendous paradox. So, let's talk about servant leadership. Emphasizes service to others rather than to oneself. So it ain't about my stock options or any of this other happy horseshit, my increases, right? It's about generating a place where people can fulfill themselves. It's got to be reinforced through organizational structure and systems. And if you find this is the path you want to go and you're in an organization that doesn't support it, you might have to move on. That's the bad news. It's supported by organizational culture, and we're going to talk about culture in organizations down the road. Rewards are oriented to reinforce service. We're going to talk about feedback and rewards and how we can manipulate those outcomes, right? It's not a quick fix. And nothing useful is rarely a quick fix, right? It's a transformational approach that is a life's work. And if we look at Dr. Deming, he was teaching people, to the day he passed away. Literally decades and decades of pounding away at it, right? Step at a time. And notice Deming with his 14 points, his theory of profound knowledge, right, is philosophical in nature. And I don't know how else to put that. So let's go to homework 8. And I want to explore this idea of leadership And so there's a multi-component part here, as you're probably getting used to now. So, for homework 8, what are we looking at? Well, rate yourself on your leadership ability, your potential on a scale of 1 to 10. And this is simple. How much of a leader am I? Well, not at all. It's 1, 10. I'm the total leader of all time, right? Maybe not quite that high, but right. So, and then, right, rate on 1 to 10. That's the simple part. Then I'm going to have a link to the MLQ. You're going to take the MLQ, right? And then you're going to take the Authentic Leadership Scale, the ALS. So you take the MLQ, you take the ALS, and then you're going to combine the scores thusly. And this is also spelled out in the homework assignment on Carmen. So you take your score on number 1 and you multiply it by 8. This is just to make all else being equal on the scores, right? Kind of like a regression equation. So if I score myself an 8 on leadership, then I'm going to multiply that by 8, so that means I get 64 on this component. Then I'm going to take my score on the MLQ, and I'm going to take my score on the ALS, and I'm going to add them all together. And that's going to be my total leadership score. So every person on the team does this, all 6, 7, 4 of you, whatever it is. All right? Now, what are you going to do with that? For a team of 6, the top 3 self-scorers are to be interviewed to ascertain what qualities they believe they demonstrate their leadership ability. These qualities should be explained behaviorally by describing the situation that supports their leadership through these examples. So if you are one of the lower scorers, then you're going to interview one of the higher scorers, and you're going to be looking to elicit information about traits, but I want evidence of this in terms of behavior, right? So now all 6 folks review the 3 interviews and see which theory best fits the situation-score relationship. So you're going to look at the top 3 interviews, and you're going to, so you're going to get that list of behaviorally supported traits. That's the first 2 sections. You see where I'm going with this, right? And then, right, you're going to say, okay, of all the theories that were in this lecture, which one kind of best supports what we found out? Okay? The trait, the behavioral, the contingency, the transformational, the emerging, and you're going to select that. So I'm hoping that this really does a couple things. First of all, it gets you in touch with yourself, but it also really explores all the elements of this lecture. And I'm going to close with a signature line. I copied it from a student. She sent me an email. And the best way to find yourself is in the service to others. And thank you, Mahatma Gandhi. Anyway, guys, I hope you have a great day. I hope to see you at our meeting, office hours, whenever. We'll probably have to discuss this assignment somewhat. So, adios.